Good evening, everyone. I want to welcome you here, both those of you who are here with us in person and the large number of people we have attending online as well. I'm Sheila Ager, and I am Dean of the Faculty of Arts, and I want to welcome you to tonight's event. And I will begin by reading our territorial acknowledgement. The University of Waterloo recognizes and acknowledges that its main campus is situated on the Haldimand Tract, land comprising 6 miles on each side of the Grand River, granted to the Haudenosaunee by the Haldimand Treaty of 1784. Both the main and the Stratford campuses are situated on land that is the traditional territory of the Attawandaron, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee peoples. And we also acknowledge and recognize that this area is now home to diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis groups. It's become customary for University of Waterloo events, activities, and publications to feature an acknowledgement that signifies our awareness not only that the university's main and Stratford campuses are located on Indigenous territorial and treaty lands, but also that treaty arrangements and relationships, while often ignored over the centuries, have never been rescinded. And it's therefore incumbent upon us to recognize our respectful indebtedness to the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples on whose traditional territories the university is situated. The territorial acknowledgement is genuine and sincere, but it behooves us to move beyond such an acknowledgement and recognize the need for relationship building with First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples, incorporating Indigenous ways of knowing into our scholarship, our curriculum, and our community, and welcoming and integrating an Indigenous presence into our student, staff, and faculty bodies. Tonight's event is supported by the Foundation for Palestinian Studies Fund, which was established with the purpose of supporting activities to raise awareness and encourage a balanced discourse on Palestinian lives and culture in the Middle East and across its diaspora. Universities play a vital role in helping society to advance. That role is rooted in academic freedom and responsibility. The freedoms to speak or express oneself and to examine, question, teach, and learn are central to our purpose. We understand that some members of the audience may be challenged by what they may hear tonight. In accordance with our policy on freedom of speech, the university expects that tonight's audience will respect the rights of others to engage in free speech without undue interference. The university stands against all forms of hate and promotion of violence. This includes anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and anti-Arab racism on our own campuses. We reject any form of harassment or intimidation based on someone's faith, national origin, or any aspect of someone's identity. I would ask you please to maintain civility throughout the lecture and then as we enter the Q&A portion of tonight's event. Pencil and paper will be distributed throughout the room for you to write down any questions, and we will be monitoring the online chat room as well. And I would now like to invite my colleague, Dr. Nathan Funk from Conrad Grebel University College, to the podium to introduce tonight's speaker. Thank you.
Greetings and good evening. It's good to see you all here despite the weather, and some of you perhaps for the second time since last Monday. Both tonight's event and last week's presentation were made possible by the Foundation for Palestinian Studies Fund, which has a mission to work towards peace through understanding. That is, through education, through seeking to comprehend realities in a deep and multifaceted manner. As anyone who has acquired basic familiarity with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict can immediately recognize, this search for understanding must necessarily include engagement with and keen analysis of the obstacles to peace. These obstacles are formidable. At the same time, our understanding can also be enhanced through careful listening to the voices of those who highlight human and humanitarian stakes and who have insights to share from their own ongoing attempts to bridge divides and address needs. Our speaker this evening, Jon Allen, is a person who knows a great deal about obstacles to peace. but he is also a person whose perspective on challenges and possibilities is informed by personal efforts to test out pathways forward, both as a Canadian government official and as a private citizen working through civil society channels. Born in Winnipeg, Jon Allen was educated in law at the University of Western Ontario and at the University of London School of Economics. He joined what was then the Department of External Affairs in 1981. His most high-profile duties as a Canadian diplomat included working from 2006 to 2010 as the Ambassador of Canada to Israel, and from 2012 to 2016 as Ambassador to Spain and Andorra. Yet he held many other postings that placed him in Mexico City, in New Delhi, in Washington, D.C., and in the Holy See, as well as in Ottawa. He developed substantive expertise in many areas, including North American trade disputes, as well as human rights, humanitarian law, and environmental law. Although no longer a Canadian diplomat, Mr. Allen is engaged in multiple ongoing endeavors. He is a distinguished senior fellow at the Canadian International Council, a diplomat in residence at Fulbright Canada, and a fellow at the Munk School of Global Affairs at the University of Toronto. In addition to his research, writing, and media commentary activities, which draw upon his diverse areas of knowledge and experience, Jon Allen is also the chair of Project Rozana Canada, which supports building bridges between Israelis and Palestinians by focusing on shared humanity and by fostering collaboration to address humanitarian needs in the healthcare sector. The core mission of Project Rozana, as described on its website, is to enhance Palestinian healthcare and foster cross-border relationships between Israelis and Palestinians at the institutional, professional, and grassroots levels. When I think about the kind of voice Jon Allen projects into the Canadian conversation about Israel and Palestine and about ways he can contribute to our search for understanding here at the University of Waterloo, the framework offered by an intriguing new book comes to mind. This book has the title, The Wall Between: What Jews and Palestinians Don't Want to Know About Each Other. And it was written by Raja Khoury, the founding president of the Canadian Arab Institute, and Jeff Wilkinson, a scholar of education with a doctorate from the University of Toronto. Together, Khoury and Wilkinson decry how, quote, the struggle about the struggle in Israel-Palestine has walled us off in our camps, unquote. In an attempt to map a way forward, Khoury and Wilkinson call for the development of constituencies inspired both by an insistent aspiration towards justice, dignity, and freedom, and by a willingness to, as they put it, work in the spaces where narratives collide, and to listen. By virtue of past employment, as well as by his current activities, Jon Allen knows a great deal about what it means to work in spaces where narratives collide, and also about trying to foster relationship and what he calls a horizon for peace, even as powerful forces appear to be pushing in other directions. So thank you, Jon Allen, for coming to Waterloo to join us for this event. We're excited about the opportunity to hear you speak and hear your words, and we look forward to the chance to engage you in conversation. So please join me in welcoming Jon Allen.
Well, that was one of the best introductions of me that I've ever heard, because it just didn't talk about what I've done, but it talked about what I value. So thank you very much. Let me begin by thanking the Foundation for Palestinian Studies Fund and Shaki Fahel, who was the founder of it. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the foundation. I've known Shaki for quite a few years, and he too works and has worked for a long time on trying to build relationships between Jews and Christians and Muslims. I want to thank the Faculty of Arts and the Dean for the invitation. I want to thank the President for being here tonight and for opening up this space for everyone here. Nathan, thank you very much again for your kind introduction. Doug Pierce, who's going to handle the questions, could be the toughest part of the evening, and Jasmine Habib, who made this all possible, extended the invitation, and who's shepherded me around all day. Jasmine and I are on a couple of groups that also try and bridge gaps, and she's a valued friend. So thank you all very much. In 1989, Francis Fukuyama pronounced the end of history, and he came to regret it. About 8 weeks ago, Jake Sullivan, Joe Biden's national security advisor, said at an Atlantic Monthly conference, quote, "The Middle East is quieter than it has been in decades," unquote. Now, to be fair to Jake, he was talking about Iraq, Yemen, and Iran. But what a horrifying difference a couple of months makes. I want to be fully transparent with you before I start. I'm Jewish. My wife is the child of Holocaust survivors. I have a sister, nieces, and nephews who live on a kibbutz in Israel, not far from the Lebanese border, and Hezbollah and Hamas rockets. Second, I have been opposed to the Israeli settlement project, to the occupation, and to the treatment of Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank since long before I became ambassador to Israel. I continue to believe in and advocate for a two-state solution as a means to ending this conflict. I am emotionally torn as I hold in my heart my feelings of sympathy for thousands of innocent Palestinians on the one hand, and for the families of dead Israelis and injured Israelis on the other. Understanding and dissecting this war may be complicated, but recognizing the death and destruction that it has produced on both sides is not. Finally, I'm also distressed by the hate and extremism, rampant anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and anti-Palestinian racism that has been generated by so many people, often young people, who refuse to understand that this is a complex and long-standing conflict, and that there is some blame to lay on both sides. But before talking about the current conflict, I wanted to go back to the results of the November 2022 election in Israel that turned that country from a complicated and imperfect but fully functioning democracy into a polarized nation that was showing signs of falling apart at the seams. It's worth a quick review because some of the policies, some of the actions, and the personalities of that government contributed directly or indirectly to the October 7 attacks and the war that we have been witnessing. Some of those actors continue to polarize the country, advocate for a continuation of the conflict, and ignite violence in the West Bank. I'll then turn to the massacre on October 7, and I'll conclude by explaining why I continue to believe that two states for two peoples remains the only solution for these two traumatized peoples if they are ever to live in peace and security going forward. Prior to the October 7 attacks, as you all know, Israel was already in crisis. The country had just experienced 39 weeks of massive protests against its far right-wing government. For the first time in Israel's history, army reservists were refusing to serve. Sitting judges were on the streets in their robes protesting, and Israelis from the right, from the left, and the center, both secular and some religious, high-tech CEOs, and union members, all were demanding an end to the government's proposals on judicial and religious reforms. In the West Bank, settlements were expanding faster than ever before, and new illegal outposts were being constructed. Settler violence against Palestinians was rampant, including what people on both sides of the Green Line called a pogrom in the Palestinian town of Hawara. Over 100 Palestinians had been killed by a combination of IDF soldiers and settlers since the beginning of 2023, while over 30 Israelis were murdered in Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, and in parts of the West Bank. Ironically, though, it was eerily quiet in Gaza, where the Netanyahu government was under the impression that by granting work permits to 20,000 Gazans and by allowing Qatar to deliver millions of dollars per month to Hamas, the Gaza Strip and Hamas were under control. Prior to the November 22 election that brought Bibi Netanyahu and company back to power, Israel had had a broad coalition government that included politicians from the right, the center, the left, and even Arab Israelis. It was far from perfect, but it brought together disparate elements of Israeli society rather than exploit their divisions. Given its multi-party character, it avoided radical or controversial policy proposals. It passed a budget that provided much-needed funding for health, education, and the Arab-Israeli sector. And it tentatively held out an olive branch to those Palestinians who were ready to talk peace. In November 2022, Israelis elected a very different coalition, one that included Bibi Netanyahu's Likud party and others who hoped to use a majority in the Knesset to pursue a radical, right-wing, nationalist, and religious agenda. Bibi's goal, as it had been since he was first indicted for 3 criminal charges, was to guarantee himself a get-out-of-jail card. His coalition partner's objective was to remove the major obstacle to their religious and expansionist intentions, the power of Israel's Supreme Court. So what brought hundreds of thousands of Israeli protesters onto the streets of almost every city in the country for 39 straight weeks? First, there were the government's own ministers and their policies. Itamar Ben-Gvir, the Minister of National Security, had a history of criminal convictions for racism and terrorism. He has called repeatedly for the expulsion of Arab citizens of Israel. Bezalel Smotrich, the Minister of Finance, with added responsibilities for the West Bank, is the leader of a far-right religious Zionist party that advocates for full Israeli sovereignty in the West Bank and a ban on Israeli Arab political parties. He opposes the rights of LGBTQ community. Aryeh Deri, the leader of an Orthodox religious party called Shas, appointed Minister of Health, Minister of the Interior, and Vice Prime Minister, had been convicted 3 times for tax fraud. And of course, the Prime Minister was himself under indictment. Second, the protesters opposed specific reforms that the coalition were trying to expedite through the Knesset. These included political control over the appointment of judges to Israeli courts and a parliamentary override of Supreme Court decisions that would have left Israel as a tyranny of the majority. Had these reforms passed with a one-seat majority vote, there would have been no other institution in the country able to protect the rights of the LGBT community, Arab Israelis, workers, refugees, or any other minority group. Recall that Israel has no constitution, no charter or Bill of Rights, and no bicameral legislature, i.e. no sober second chamber to review and possibly oppose legislation. And the reforms didn't stop with the courts. The government actually wanted to equate the status and the salaries of Orthodox religious students with those of soldiers and exempt the former from military service. These measures would have further polarized the country, with secular Israelis sending their children to the army to defend the country, while they subsidized a growing Orthodox community whose young men spent their lives studying the Torah. Some of the most extreme reforms were aimed directly at the Arab-Israeli sector and included banning the Palestinian flag within the Green Line, imposing the death penalty on Israeli Arabs convicted of terrorism, and deporting those, if convicted, of the ill-defined criminal crime of disloyalty. These provisions would not have applied to Jewish Israelis. Missing, for the most part, from the protests was any attention to the treatment of Arab Israelis in Israel or of the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza. While I understand why this was the case, the organizers wanted to minimize the fissures between the various groups of protesters. Israel will be an imperfect democracy as long as it continues to discriminate against Arab Israelis of Israel and it continues to occupy the West Bank and Gaza. So let me now turn to the events which began on Saturday, October the 7th. The massacre by Hamas terrorists that day, and it was a horrific massacre, resulted in the largest number of Jewish civilians killed in one day since the Holocaust. I raise this fact not because Israeli blood is any different than Palestinian blood, and I will come back to the humanitarian crisis facing Palestinians in Gaza in a moment. But it is key to understanding the almost universal support for a decisive and no-holds-barred response to the events of October 7 that exists in Israel today. And it is in part why seemingly rational arguments for a more cautious and strategic way forward were rejected. October 7 has been compared by the media to 9/11 and to the 1973 Yom Kippur War. There are, of course, similarities, but it was also different. It was the first attack on pre-1967 Israeli soil. It represented so massive an intelligence and military failure that it has shaken Israelis to the core, broken their contract with the state, the IDF, and the Mossad, and made them question whether they can ever again be secure in the region, in their country, and in their homes. I know that's hard for some people to understand, and I'm not comparing this with what Palestinians have gone through over the last 5 or 6 weeks or for the last 50 years. I'm just trying to explain to you where Israelis are coming from. sometimes shocking me, often shocking me. Israel's stated war objectives to eliminate the Hamas political and military leadership also raise comparisons with the failed US efforts in Vietnam, in Iraq, and in Afghanistan. The difference, however, is that those wars didn't take place on American soil. Israelis will tell you that they have nowhere else to go. For them, what took place on October 7 is existential. Suffice it to say, the attack was extremely well planned. Some 2,200 terrorists entered southern Israel, and Hamas fired 3,000 rockets in one day. It took Hamas a month to fire that many rockets during the last Israeli-Hamas conflict. The ease and success of the mission, killing 1,200, wounding 3,300, and taking some 240 hostages, seems to have gone beyond Hamas's wildest dreams. So how did it happen? I'm going to talk here about the proximate causes of the attack and not about the historical root causes, which I'll come back to, and which are more complicated but equally important. First, as alluded to, let's recall that the Hamas Charter calls for the destruction of Israel and the elimination of Jews from the Mediterranean to the Jordan River. It has controlled Gaza with an iron fist since 2007, when it ousted the Palestinian Authority from the territory. If that isn't clear enough, a senior Hamas leader told the New York Times 3 weeks ago that Israel can expect a second, a third, and a fourth attack until it is eliminated from the map. And he added, "We must annihilate the country." There is much speculation about why Hamas attacked when it did. It was, for example, 50 years plus a day from the start of the Yom Kippur War, and on a holiday when many soldiers spent their day with families and friends. Contrary to previously agreed protocols between Jordan, Israel, and the Palestinians, certain Israeli coalition ministers had been praying on the grounds of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, shades of Ariel Sharon doing the same in advance of the Second Intifada. A key factor seems to have been the fact that the IDF and Israel's intelligence agencies had taken their eyes off Gaza. 3 military units were shifted to the West Bank to quell violence there, violence that was provoked by the coalition's policies of settlement expansion and threats of annexation. Indeed, southern Israel, along the Gaza border, was woefully unprepared and far too reliant on technological solutions such as smart fences, sensors, drones, and remote-controlled machine guns. Then there was the Israeli-US-Saudi agreement that was being negotiated and that would have specifically targeted Iran, Hezbollah, and Hamas. And as with the Abraham Accords before it, there was no guarantee that this agreement was going to provide much in the way of support for the Palestinian cause. Indeed, Bibi Netanyahu appeared this year before the UN General Assembly and held up a map depicting an Israel that stretched from the Mediterranean to the Jordan River. And he frequently boasts that Israel can now gain recognition from key Arab states without addressing Palestinian demands for their own state. The agreement he entered into with his right-wing coalition partners actually calls for the annexation of the West Bank. It's therefore not surprising that Hamas leaders have boasted since October 7 that their actions have once again put the Palestinian question back on the front pages. Finally, it's also been said that the Netanyahu government contributed to the crisis more generally by polarizing his country and exposing its internal weaknesses to its enemies. The Minister of Defense told the Prime Minister as much months before the attack, but Bibi chose to ignore the warnings. So where are we now? After 8 weeks of war, 6 weeks of bombing, and leveling approximately 1/2 of the buildings of northern Gaza, the IDF has now encircled Gaza City and the tunnels where they believe Hamas military and political leaders were hiding. Some 14,000 Palestinians are believed to have been killed and some 35,000 injured. The vast majority are innocent civilians, including upwards of 4,000 children. Those that have survived have been largely starved of food, water, medicines, and fuel. Approximately 1.3 million Gazans have moved to the south, creating a humanitarian crisis of its own. I fully acknowledge Israel's right to self-defense, and I sympathize with the trauma and suffering of the survivors, the injured, and the remaining hostages. It's also clear that fighting inside Gaza, a densely populated, built-up urban area where Hamas intentionally uses the civilian population as human shields, and does indeed use hospitals and schools as safe havens for its fighters, leaves Israel between a rock and a hard place. You may recall that when the leader of Hamas in Gaza was asked by the New York Times why ordinary Gazans were not being protected in the tunnels, his answer was, "The tunnels are for us. UNRWA is supposed to take care of the civilians." But whatever Israel's rights and fears are, these do not, in my view, justify the siege and collective punishment that Israel initially imposed, nor the trickle of humanitarian supplies that it has permitted to enter Gaza up to now, nor, of course, the massive number of deaths and injuries of innocent Palestinian men, women, and children. Clearly, Israel is choosing, as many militaries do, to minimize the casualties to its own forces, almost irrespective of the collateral damage its operations are causing. At a very minimum, a humanitarian pause should have been agreed to earlier, one that would have allowed for the delivery of water, food, medicines, fuel, and other aid to those in need, and to permit as many hostages and foreign nationals as possible to leave. Israel can't order Palestinians to move to the south of the Gaza Strip and continue to bomb there. It should realize that its actions will further radicalize Palestinians in Gaza, in the West Bank, and Muslims worldwide. It must realize that eliminating an ideology is far more difficult than killing Hamas's leaders and destroying its infrastructure, if that is possible. And Israel must make clear that suggestions by some Israeli ministers to rid Palestinians of Gaza and the West Bank, to drop a nuclear bomb on Gaza, or to suggest somehow that all Gazans were responsible for Hamas's actions on October 7 are abhorrent, and that those who mouth them should be held accountable. There is, of course, much debate of whether a ceasefire should be agreed to, with many international institutions, including the UN, most NGOs, demanding it. If Israel is going to restart the war,
in order to further root out Hamas leadership, and it may do so once the majority of hostages are released, and possibly before. It is incumbent on it to significantly reduce the number of deaths and injuries it's causing going forward. It must adopt a far more surgical and targeted approach that minimizes any innocent loss of life. The occupation, the threats of annexation, and the failure of Israel for 15 years to even contemplate a horizon for peace don't and cannot justify the horrific attacks of October 7. But they do help explain why Israel quickly loses the sympathy of the world and the media when their right to self-defense inevitably leads to the death and to the destruction we're witnessing today. The failure to address the occupation, the covert support for Hamas aimed at dividing and conquering the Palestinians, and the day-to-day treatment of Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza, especially under governments led by Bibi Netanyahu, but not only, mean that Israel does not come to the table with clean hands. Context and root causes don't justify terror, but they, Israel's bravado, its insensitive advocacy, all help to explain why sympathy and understanding for Israel's situation is often short-lived. So what next? In Israel, I predict that Bibi Netanyahu will be ousted soon after the war ends. The 39 weeks of protests prior to the war, combined with a majority view that he bears direct responsibility for this national trauma, should mean that he will be forced to resign, either by his Likud colleagues or by even more protests. He and his coalition partners are way down in the polls. His radical reform agenda is, I believe, now off the table. Whether a new Likud leader capable of holding the current coalition together can be found, or a new and better grouping will unite to lead the country, or whether Israel will move to new elections remains unclear. It's highly unlikely that Israel will want to reoccupy Gaza. Initially, it will want to control the security situation in the Strip and be able to re-enter if there are signs of a resurgent Hamas. Hopefully, and over time, a new Israeli government will work with the United States to install an interim, perhaps Gulf-led force, and eventually a Palestinian governance mechanism. Reconstruction and the delivery of humanitarian aid will be the first priorities. For the West Bank, the best-case scenario would see the provision of aid and training leading eventually to free and fair elections, followed over time with elections in Gaza. If Salam Fayyad, the best finance and prime minister that the PA ever had, can be convinced to return, it would hasten the process. Hamas would not be allowed to participate in those elections. This will all take time and patience. Perhaps the one glimmer of hope flowing from this horrific time for all concerned is that the push for a two-state solution is now back on the table. President Biden, Justin Trudeau, former Israeli Prime Ministers Naftali Bennett, no lefty, Ehud Barak, and Ehud Olmert are all saying that now is the time to give this option a chance. The key question in the medium term is whether October 7 will move Israel further right and, in my view, closer to the abyss, or whether Israelis will finally realize that a permanent separation from Palestinians is a far better solution than a continuing occupation. 4 years after the Yom Kippur War, Anwar Sadat spoke in Israel's parliament. The historic handshake between Yitzhak Rabin and Yasser Arafat on the White House lawn took place after the First Intifada. No one believed that apartheid would end in South Africa when it did. No one saw the Berlin Wall falling when it fell. No one thought that Protestants and Catholics in Northern Ireland could make peace after 400 years of fighting. I continue to believe that the two states for two peoples is the only solution for Israelis and Palestinians. The 6 final status issues to be resolved are well known and can be achieved with strong leadership backed by political will, with compromise from both sides, and with the strength to reject and withstand efforts by extremists on both sides to thwart peace. I hope that the horrific crisis that we are witnessing today may be the impetus for wiser men and women in Israel and in Palestine to finally realize this. To avoid these repeated cycles of violence, real efforts must be made to create a political horizon, a horizon for hope. The most important signal that Israel could send now would be to unequivocally stop settlement expansion and begin to dismantle the settlement outposts. Settlements that its own Supreme Court have declared illegal. On the Palestinian side, Mahmoud Abbas should unequivocally denounce Hamas's attacks on October 7, reaffirm his support for a two-state solution, and pledge to move towards elections. Thank you very much. I think I'll stop here, and I welcome your questions.
Good evening. My name is Doug Peers. I'm a member of the faculty here at the University of Waterloo, the Faculty of Arts, and it's my great pleasure to moderate the discussions. My colleague here, Dr. Jasmine Habib, will be collecting questions. We're also receiving them online. Some people chose to join us from home, which, given the weather, is probably not a bad idea. And I'll try and interleave between the two groups and direct some questions at Jon, and also try and cover off as much as I can the various questions that are coming in. And while Jasmine's collecting them, I'll start with one. From a member of our online audience, they observed that all the Israeli protesters demanding the return of the hostages suggests that, left to itself, the Israeli government would not be trying to get the hostages back. And from that, they suggest that maybe the temporary ceasefires are actually getting in the way of the government's objectives with regards to Gaza, namely the destruction of Gaza. And the question is, do you think that it's the protests that are kind of driving the Israeli government right now, or is the Israeli government itself kind of responding to the issue of the captives?
Yeah, thanks very much. Initially, I think the Israeli government had one priority, and that was to attack Hamas political and military leaders. Very quickly, the families of the hostages began to protest that. And the government is now stuck between these radical right ministers who are pushing the government to continue the fight and made a precondition of the hostage deal a promise that they would indeed continue the fight. On the one hand, and on the other hand, the families of the remaining hostages, and I think now the President of the United States. I think there is increasing pressure not to continue the fight. I'm not sure that this government will heed that pressure, but there's certainly, we've got 2 more days of hostage releases and ceasefire and Palestinian prisoner releases, and maybe more after that. I think Hamas has it in their interests, certainly, to stretch the ceasefire out as long as it can, and it's got quite a few hostages that it can release over time. And then hopefully pressure will continue to build so that it becomes more and more difficult for Israel to restart.
Thank you. Given that war often makes incumbents more popular, is it not likely that Netanyahu's influence will grow in the years ahead?
No, I don't think it will. I think Bibi is truly finished. My understanding is that if his own party doesn't dump him, the protests that were occurring before the war started will be child's play compared to what is coming afterwards. He is the only person of senior rank that has refused to accept responsibility. The Chief of Staff of Defense, the head of intelligence, and the head of the Interior Security Service, the Shin Bet, have all accepted responsibility, and they will resign as soon as the war is over, which will leave one person who has refused to accept that responsibility. He's also refused to meet with the families of the hostages because he knows the kind of reception that he's going to get on public television as they film it. So I really think Bibi is gone, and I certainly hope so.
How does U.S. policy affect the Canadian government's stance on the conflict?
I'm not sure that it's U.S. policy. I think if you take a look at most Western governments, they continue to call for humanitarian pauses and not a ceasefire. There are 3 Western governments we were talking over dinner that have called specifically for a ceasefire. I think what you can say is if the Americans call for a ceasefire, everybody else will jump in and call for it. I don't think it's a question of them putting pressure on us not to do it. Every one of those leaders is also caught between this question of humanitarian pause, ceasefire. If you look at the polling, and there was polling done over the weekend in Canada, and the same figures appear in the United States, there's a real demographic shift. 50 and up seem to support Israel's right to self-defense. I'm sure they don't support the level of civilian deaths that have occurred, but the principle of right to self-defense. 18 to 35, absolutely not. So you've got these politicians, I mean, it's incredible, but it's true. You've got politicians weighing these numbers and their populations to try and determine where they're going to go and which way.
Thank you. And here's one from our online audience. When people like Palestinians are under occupation for over 53 years, don't they have the right to resist the occupation by all means, according to international law?
It's 56 years, and I've always said that you can't tell the Palestinians that they can't go to the International Criminal Court, they can't go to the International Court of Justice, they shouldn't use BDS, and then what? What should the Palestinians do if they're not going to use violence? I don't think, first of all, yeah, even if they are under occupation, I don't think international law justifies or permits terrorism. I'm not suggesting there aren't a lot of emotions out there, and I'm not suggesting that after a certain period of time, violence is almost inevitable. And I am suggesting that if Israel doesn't move and create a political horizon, they likely will see more violence, but I don't justify it. Well, I'll stop there.
Okay. Which two-state solution proposal would you support?
I would support the two-state solution that was very, very almost reached between Ehud Barak and Yasser Arafat. It essentially divided the country along the Green Line, except for the big settlements that exist, and there would be a swap in return. It would divide Jerusalem. The Palestinians would get East Jerusalem and the Israelis West Jerusalem. There would be security arrangements. There would be a commitment to end the conflict. And on the question of the right of return, a small number of Palestinians would be allowed to come back to Israel proper, and as many Palestinians as wanted could go back to the new Palestinian state. Those are more or less the final status issues, and they can be achieved.
Thank you. And one from the online audience. I wonder how you see the role of other countries such as Iran, Russia, China, Brazil, and other countries that in the UN have been asking for a ceasefire. Is it just a Western business to fix the situation in the Middle East? And how could the Palestinian and the Arab world be given more agency in this process?
Well, I think the Arab world, the Gulf states, they have plenty of agency. Unfortunately, they have never, in any substantial way, except for Qatar and its millions of dollars going into Gaza and Hamas, they have never supported the Palestinian cause. The Saudi king in the early 2000s put forward a proposal of full recognition by the Gulf states of Israel in exchange for a Palestinian state. But frankly, since then, not much has been done. Now, some people say the Gulf states are tired of Mahmoud Abbas's corruption and nepotism. Some say that they think that the Palestinians should have agreed to the set of agreements that I just mentioned. I'm not sure what the reason is, but essentially the Palestinians have been on their own and out of the headlines for a long time. And I think Hamas probably, as I said, thinks that they've now put them back into the headlines.
Thank you. How has the lack of response by the Palestinian Authority, Fatah, influenced the Israeli occupation of the West Bank?
One more time?
I'm trying to... How has, or what has the lack of response by the Palestinian Authority and Fatah done for the current situation?
The current situation. Yeah. Well, Hamas, I think, certainly hoped and maybe believed that October 7 would bring Hezbollah into the fray, would ignite the Palestinians in the West Bank, and might even contribute to intercommunal violence in Israel proper, as happened in May 21, 2 years ago. So I think Hamas must be quite disappointed. And I know that I have heard that both Iran and Hezbollah were surprised about what happened and when it happened. They weren't advised ahead of time. And I think there seems to be a great reluctance to expand this into a wider conflict. Some of it may be due to two U.S. aircraft carriers in the Med and messages that have been passed by the Americans and by the Gulf states to Iran and to Hezbollah. Some of it might simply be that they're not interested in engaging Israel at a time when they know Israel means serious business. The last time Hezbollah engaged Israel, there was major bombing in southern Beirut. There was great disenchantment with Hezbollah in Lebanon, and Nasrallah, the Hezbollah leader, actually said, if I had known what the Israeli response was going to be, I wouldn't have started that war. The other thing I would say is that there is a saying in the Middle East that Iran is prepared to fight Israel to the death of the last Arab. In other words, they will not engage, but they're happy to have Hezbollah and Hamas engage on their behalf.
This question is kind of prefaced by a statement of one person's own opinion. It's from the online audience. And they state, I do not believe that a two-state solution is possible anymore. And then the question to you is, what do you think are the obstacles to establishing incrementally a one-state solution based upon the principles of democracy and the protection of human rights?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And, you know, if you're somebody that believes in democracy and the rule of law and majority rule, that's great. But you are dealing with two people who don't like each other, who don't trust each other. After this set of conflict and death and destruction, the idea of putting these two people together, it's like putting two people who really desperately need a divorce into the same house. What Israel and Palestine need is a really strict divorce, no sharing of the kids, and maybe in 20 years we can have a free trade agreement and share water, and once again Israelis can shop in Palestinian vegetable markets and Palestinians can go to the beach in Israel, as they did not that long ago. But one state now means one of two things. It either means a Muslim majority state, because eventually we're about half-half right now in population. Eventually the Muslim majority will be larger. So it either means a Muslim majority state, which Israel is not going to tolerate, no matter how idealistic it sounds like, or it's going to mean an apartheid state where a minority Jewish population rules over a majority Palestinian population. Those are the only two options. As hard as a two-state solution is going to be, I don't think one is possible and we want the other one. We don't want apartheid and a Muslim majority over Israeli Jews is not going to happen. Unfortunately, they're the asymmetric power and they can prevent it from happening despite what the world might say.
In your talk, you ended on a message of hope, as if we will surely see a positive, peaceful outcome from this. The history of this area indicates otherwise. So why do you feel this time the outcome could be different than in the past?
There is peace between Egypt and Israel. There is peace between Jordan and Israel. There is peace between Bahrain and UAE and Morocco and Sudan, for what it's worth. Saudi Arabia was on its way to peace. None of these things were thought possible. Many of those things are under threat now, given what Israel's doing, but frankly, they will come back because, as I said, the Gulfies don't worry enough about Palestinians. So why am I hopeful? I kind of outlined why I'm hopeful, because after you've tried all these other options, and after you've seen the death and destruction that it brings to both sides, you've got to think about another option. Israel and Palestine were quite close to a deal, Arafat and Ehud Barak. They didn't make it. So what's happened since is Bibi Netanyahu's been telling
everybody in Israel, there's no partner for peace. See? You know, the line is the Palestinians always miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity. The other way of looking at what happened was they were very close to peace. Give it another shot. If you fail, you fail. If Israel creates a horizon for peace, ends the settlement project, begins to take away the settlement outposts, if they actually throw out their hand for peace and the Palestinians reject it, or Hamas thwarts it, or the Palestinians can't get their act together, at least Israel can come to the world and say, we tried, we failed. But you can't say no negotiation, no state. We're going to keep grabbing a little more piece of your territory every day, every month, every year. You can't do that because you don't have clean hands. Give it a shot. If it works, great. If it doesn't, you can then tell the world we tried.
And this question here is actually building upon your discussion about the two-state solution, and would like you to explain a little bit more. How can we address the issue of Jerusalem, one city and a two-state solution, and your thoughts about how could that best be negotiated?
There was a former Canadian ambassador named Mike Bell. He was ambassador in Jordan, he was ambassador in Egypt, he was ambassador in Israel twice. And another Canadian diplomat named Mike Malloy, who was ambassador in Jordan. They got together with some Americans, some Israelis, and some Palestinians, and they came up with something called the Jerusalem Project, funded by the Canadian government. And it actually lays out in quite detail how you could do it, how you could have East Jerusalem for the Palestinians, West Jerusalem for the Israelis, and a universal old city jurisdiction with Jordan or the Palestinians in control of the Sharam al-Harif, the Temple Mount, etc. Not impossible, and more difficult now, but it was doable 20 years ago.
Menachem Begin and Anwar Sadat, both in some ways unlikely allies, were able to reach a deal. Are there anybody of their caliber or people like them currently on either side who might be able to reach the kind of agreement that you're aware of?
Yeah, it's a tough question. The way I answer it is by saying nobody thought that Vladimir Zelensky was going to be a leader who would be able to withstand Russia for almost 3 years. He was a comedian. He was a TV actor. When Russia invaded, the Americans offered to get him out of the country. He said, I don't need a lift, I need weapons. There are many smart, entrepreneurial, innovative Palestinians in Hebron, in Ramallah, in many, many cities in the West Bank, and in Gaza, I'm sure. I don't know which one is going to take the lead. I suggested Salam Fayyad because he really was a great prime minister. No corruption, no nepotism. There's a guy in jail, many of you know Marwan Barghouti. He's in jail and hasn't said much, but he's the most popular leader in both Palestine, in the West Bank and Gaza. If the Israelis had the guts, they would let him out and let him try and lead. On the Israeli side, there's great despair about leadership there, not only because of October 7, but because of the government that they had. I'm not sure what's going to happen, but there there are leaders there. Maybe they'll come out of the protest movement. Maybe they'll come out of some of the existing leaders. I'm not sure, but you can find leadership. You need will. You need goodwill.
Any way forward to a two-state solution is going to require elections. And how would you hold, or how could you see a fair election being held in Gaza? Who could run? Would Hamas be able to be run? I mean, if you're having a free and fair election, who gets to determine who gets to run?
Yeah, so I kind of suggested, first of all, the war is going to come to an end. There's going to have to be reconstruction, humanitarian aid in Gaza. It will take a while. The talk is Palestinian Authority can't go in right after Israel's been bombing. They'll once again be seen as collaborators, and their popularity will continue to be at 19% or whatever it is. Hamas is not going to be there. So the idea is to, once the dust has settled, the Americans will try and encourage the Gulf states to come in. I mean, no Western country wants to go in. There's going to be counterinsurgency. But the likelihood of a Gulf state reinforced by the United Nations, a Gulf state force reinforced by the United Nations, could have a chance of bringing some stability. Once you've got stability there and you've got a legitimate governance regime in the West Bank, that's when you begin to work on governance in Gaza and eventually hold elections there. It's a long process. It's not, as I said, going to happen overnight, but it's doable. This?
Yes. Why does Israel hold the right to cut off the water of the West Bank and Gaza anytime it wants before that condition?
Why does Israel have the right, or why does it cut off water to both Gaza and the West Bank? And they did it before October 7th. If I had the answer, and if I could influence what they do, I promise you I would. I mean, why they? Yeah, I mean that's right. If you don't have hope, and if you're under occupation for 56 years, there's a problem, a big problem, and there's going to be a response. I agree. I wish I could answer.
You've been asked if you could comment a bit more on Project Rozana and what we might derive from that in terms of developing ways towards coexistence.
Sure. Nathan, thanks for mentioning Project Rozana. Project Rozana, as you heard, is a thanks, Sharky, for asking the question. Project Rozana is a nonprofit, started in Australia, 10 years old. We have affiliates here in Canada. I'm the chair here, in the US, in the UK, in Germany, in Switzerland. And we have an office in Israel, and we're just about to open an office in Palestine. And essentially, the object is to build trust and respect between Palestinians and Israelis through health. We're talking about Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza, and Israelis. Health is the one sector where people deal with each other with respect and trust. There are 100,000 permits given every year for Palestinians to be treated in Israeli hospitals. This isn't free. You get a permit from the Palestinians, you get a permit from the Israelis, the Palestinian Health Ministry contributes. If there's not enough money, the Israeli hospitals pick it up. So there's already a relationship going on. What we do, we transport Palestinians from their villages in the West Bank to the checkpoints, and then from the checkpoints to their hospital appointments, and then back. If a Palestinian had to pay to go from the Gaza checkpoint to a hospital in Israel, it would be $150 US. Mostly women and children, pediatric oncology, pediatric cardiology, kidney disease, etc. That's one project. We train Palestinian psychologists, Jewish Israeli psychologists, and Arab Israeli psychologists in PTSD in children. Both sides are obviously affected by terror, and the children are most affected. We train these psychologists in English in Hadassah Hospital, and then they go out and they do their work. We have a project that uses Israeli technology from Sheba Hospital and sends Palestinian gynecologists, GPs, dentists, nurses, and social workers to remote Palestinian villages. They use this technology to do ultrasound, to send back the results to West Bank hospitals and to Israel if necessary. Whole series of other projects. We got $2.35 million from USAID to train 500 nurses, 250 Palestinian, 250 Israeli. We're also providing them with Hebrew and Arabic language training and courses in mutual respect, etc., etc. We've had some great successes. Despite the war, we're operating. We've got 3 projects still going. The theme of our emergency appeal is, even in war, humanity is possible. And have a look at our website if you're interested in being involved. Unfortunately, being involved is giving money or organizing a group of students or doctors or university presidents who want to get together and support this cause. Shaki.
Jon, I want to commend you on Project Rozana. As you well know, I am very involved, and on behalf of my team. I was there in August this year and August last year. You didn't mention about the first rehabilitation center in Hebron that's being built with the help of Project Rozana, and we're honored to participate and partner with you, because for civil society, health and education are a major component. You know, we have the Foundation for Education, you have Project Rozana, and we're coming together. And I urge everybody, because when there is no hope in this particular case, we have to create and invent hope. You know, and I think the efforts of Project Rozana, of CEDO, of the people that believe in coexistence and two-state solution. It's been said, if 2 men are in love with the same woman, one is out of luck, but if 2 people love the same land, and in this particular case, we have no choice. You know, they have to share it. So I want to thank you for an excellent talk tonight. Thank you for coming to Waterloo, and good luck with Project Rozana, and we are participating.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Well, I think on that note, and it's also nice to end our talk on a positive note, looking at opportunities for collaboration, especially, and I'll remember this expression, to work in spaces where narratives collide. So thank you for helping us to explore those narratives and hopefully find ways that they can collide in much more positive ways. So please join me in thanking Jon Allen for a great talk.